The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spinoff with help from Callaghan Innovation. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
This podcast has talked a lot to leaders about their success. But as any of these leaders would tell you, success is not just a leader thing. It's created by the team you have around you. And attracting great talent has perhaps never been so hard. With remote work, now you aren't just competing against your local market, but the whole world. How do companies attract this talent and create the conditions for them to excel and also stay with the company? A lot of this comes down to the employee experience. But what exactly is it, and how do you get a good one? Today's guest believes it isn't even something leaders alone should be deciding. It's the people in the company that can best understand and design the ideal setup. Samantha Gadd founded Humankind about 10 years ago to be a new kind of HR and people and culture company. They've specialised over time in this employee experience area, helping some of our biggest, best and most successful organisations, from growth companies like Sharesies or Supreme Coffee, through to government departments, design better culture to get better results. Samantha has recently stepped out of the CEO role to start a specialist employee experience design school. And to talk the journey, design thinking, and what's next, Humankind founder Samantha Gadd joins us now by Zoom from Wellington. Tēnā koe, thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Simon. How are you?
Great, thank you for being along. And, let's start at the beginning. You started as HR shop. What got you into the space and what led you to begin?
Yeah, so I had been working in HR for some time, and actually I'd got a little bit disillusioned with HR about 14-ish years ago and had trained to become a life coach. And while I was working at one of the large law firms in their HR team, I decided to go out on my own and create a life coaching business. And the first week I was out on my own, someone from my network actually reached out to me saying, I'm in a small business, we just really need some HR help. Are you doing any contracting on the side? I've seen you've left your HR role. And at that point I was like, sure, I can come and help. And what I realised is that the small business not only needed help with this little problem, but there was a whole bunch of other things that they needed support with, but they didn't have a full-time HR manager, or they didn't have a need to hire someone on their team. So one thing led to another, and I ended up having kind of a portfolio of small organisations I was supporting with HR projects as they were growing. And it was probably about 11 years ago that I realised that there was quite a need for small and medium organisations that couldn't justify hiring an HR person in-house but needed that on a consulting basis. And I also recognised there was a group of amazing women who were in my network who were mums returning to the workforce who had had really big HR roles but didn't want to go back into full-time work, so wanted flexible work that was really interesting, well paid. And so I put those together and created HR Shop. And it really did start as a group of mums meeting in the Wellington Library over a hot chocolate with buggies, talking about the small businesses we were helping.
Yeah, that's and HR itself has gone through quite a big image and self kind of actualization change over the last 10 years. Tell me about this move from HR going from kind of, I guess, rules and regulations into being the home of kind of culture and people growth.
Yeah, I mean, HR is evolving so much. I think, it started out as personnel and records keeping, and now really we're into people and culture, employee experience. And I think, part of that, or at least recently, is about that shift of power from, people being lucky to have a job to organisations being lucky to attract the right people and needing to do more for their people. So it's evolving a lot, and it should be.
And you had your own evolution about halfway through, changing from HR Shop to Humankind. Tell me about that decision, as it can't be an easy decision to change both the name but also a bit of the focus of the business, hey?
Yeah, it was a really interesting decision, and one that I completely underestimated, frankly. So we had been operating for about 3 years very successfully. So we were, Deloitte Fast 50 growth and going really well. And I have a vivid memory of a client of mine saying, so Sam, do you do sort of inspiring leadership workshops, or do you just do HR? And I was like, right, that was the nail in the coffin of the name HR. And it was at the sort of same time that I was discovering this concept of employee experience. So knew I needed to get the word HR or those letters out of the business name. So I decided to change the name to Humankind, but I did completely underestimate what that would mean.
What did it mean?
It really meant changing the name changed everything. So a brand is not just a name, as we all know. And actually what it meant is we went from, a bunch of sort of part-time, mostly contractors, quite flexible, mostly small businesses, to being a fully fledged professional services business. And, the biggest challenge for me, honestly, in that situation was that actually, a large number of the team eventually decided that they didn't want to be at Humankind. They joined HR Shop, and we really needed to transition into that professional services model, which at the time was really challenging, but certainly haven't looked back now. So it's been quite the making of us.
And a big part of that as well was bringing purpose to the front of the organisation. And I think people are really familiar with purpose-led organisations when, it's a more sustainable cleaner, or, it's an outerwear brand that's all about saving the world. But how does purpose play a role in a professional services business?
Yeah, it's a really great question. HR Shop was always sort of had my personal purpose, which has always been to help people to love what they do. It's been something that's driven me from very early in my career. But it was really only probably 3 or so years ago that I recognised that purpose, and what I mean by that, those words weren't really being used, and it wasn't really resonating as much in Humankind as what I had hoped. So we actually did a big exercise, and a lot of time later landed on our purpose today, which is humanity at work, or to lead humanity at work. And it's really interesting because actually, to me, it's sort of a lot of it means the same thing as helping people to love what they do. But it's been unbelievably transformational to have a purpose that everyone in our organisation really resonates with. And there probably wouldn't be a day in Humankind where I don't hear those words being used. So it is definitely what drives us on a daily basis.
And what does that kind of mean? Is that because the HR function maybe are seen as the people who, issue the warnings or fire people, and maybe there's not a lot of a feeling of humanity with that function? Or, is that a explicit push against that kind of bad image, perhaps?
Oh, for sure. And, it's really interesting. To lead humanity at work for us means taking a really employee-centric or human-centred approach to our organisations that we're supporting. It's amazing because you'd think HR or human resources would be really human-centred, but, it does take sometimes a bit of a mindset change for organisations to take that really human-centred approach.
Yeah, kind of employee first, not rule first.
Exactly.
And tell me, you've mentioned that employee experience idea there. It's been an emerging concept. How do you describe it? And, how does an organisation actually meaningfully embrace it and not just use it as a buzzword?
Yeah, so employee experience to us is essentially what goes on in employees' minds and in employees' hearts, and also in the interactions that employees have at work. And it's really quite all-encompassing, kind of a little bit like culture. You know, culture is described as the way we do things around here. So it's quite a broad concept. And what I absolutely love about employee experience, and I still vividly remember learning about this about 6 years ago, is that it's just a much broader way of looking at an organisation. And so we look at the 4 types of employee experiences that people are having in their workplace, which are related to purpose, relationships, enablers, and performance. And it really supports us to see what's happening in an organisation.
Talk me through those 4 enablers, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so for organisations to really figure out how to go about improving their employee experience, we generally look at these 4 types of experiences. So purpose experiences, which relate to individuals having a real sense of connection to the purpose of an organisation, or a sense of connection to what impact their role can have on the broader strategic objectives of the organisation and how they're making a difference. Relationship experiences, of course, are around the connections that we have at work. So the connection we have with our immediate leader, the connections we have within our team, and also my team's connections with other teams. So those relationships are critical for having a great EX at work. Enabling experiences, of course, related to the tools and technology and a physical environment, the processes and systems, everything enables us to get our job done. If those things are clunky or frustrating, then of course that impacts our employee experience, so making that really smooth and enabling. And then lastly, performance experience related to, of course, individuals having great role clarity, but also having that sense of satisfaction or success, that they know what a good day, week, month at work looks like, and they get that sense of satisfaction themselves.
Yeah, and that's quite a lot broader than maybe a really traditional view of a corporate HR facility, where it's like, these are the rules that you follow. Maybe if you're lucky, there's some forward progression in your career that's been signalled, but only if you follow all of the steps. And you have to use these software tools that are a bit boring. And by having these 4 kind of areas where it's a push to make it employee-centred, how do you do that? So, I mean, I guess it is the kind of thing that can be a really dangerous buzzword. If it's not true, it can create even more cynicism if people go, we're doing an employee-centred thing, and if the employees don't really feel that.
Yeah, well, I think it just starts with talking to your employees. I think a lot of organisations do exit interviews when people leave, but, I'd really encourage organisations to do stay interviews. Interview your people while they're still there and find out, what's working really well for them, what's getting in their way, what they love, what's frustrating, and really hear from your people what their experience is like. And if you have those conversations, there's just bound to be kind of gold nuggets of where the employee experience can be improved. And I know traditionally sort of a lot of HR teams, and I know myself when I was trained and when I was working in HR, we spend a lot of time working on those key life cycle moments. How do you attract? How do you recruit? How do you onboard? Performance, and then exits. And, from my very rough back of the envelope calculations, I think employees probably spend only about 5% of their time at work in one of those stages, which means that about 95% of their time at work is just doing their job. So generally when we're talking about employee experience, we're talking about like how to make the everyday better, not just those key moments that matter.
And how do you get employees to kind of co-create or co-design those as a best practice idea?
Yeah, so I think I think a lot of people do quite well of getting the initial feedback from employees, whether it's that initial brainstorm or the survey that tells you that something's not quite right. And what we would say is don't stop the collaboration or co-design with employees at that point. Continue through to, first of all, it's about getting really clear on what problem you're trying to solve. So that discovery and listening and having those conversations is really critical, and then making sure that you've really defined what that problem is. And then when it goes into designing the solutions, I think often business leaders or people in the HR team or, people that are in people leadership positions, they feel this real weight of responsibility of coming up with the solutions and having to solve the problem. And the reality is the best way to solve the problem is to have the people that it's for designing that solution. So doing the brainstorming or designing those solutions with those people, prototyping, testing ideas with the employees that it's for, right through to sort of execution. So that's generally how we would recommend kind of taking an employee-centred approach, is involving people the whole way along, not just at the beginning.
And is that a brave thing for leaders to do in an organisation? Is it an easy thing? How do you make it something that goes the right way for everyone?
It's so interesting, eh? So I think it's a bit brave, but probably not in the way you'd expect. So I think the bravery comes at essentially like walking into a room, being brave enough to not have the answer, because, you know, as leaders, we really feel like we have to have the answer. And personally, I love not having to have the answer. I think, you know, the funny thing is, you know, we've done so much work with different organisations, and one thing that is at top of mind for me now is, you know, flexible working policies. And we think, oh my gosh, if we co-design this with our employees, we're going to have all sorts of wild and wonderful ideas about what flexible working looks like. But, you know, it's not what happens. You know, employees are really reasonable. They've also got the best interests of the business at mind, and it's really interesting when you have a group of leaders and a group of employees, and you talk about where flexibility starts and stops and what it means to them. You know, you'll find that there's huge crossover, and really they're mostly on the same page. So, it shouldn't be too scary.
And what are the benefits of getting the employees to be the people who set some of these ideas?
The huge benefit is not having to focus so much on buy-in. So, you know, if you're ever sitting around an executive table kind of talking about how to get buy-in and how to get people on board with a certain idea or something, an initiative that you're wanting to launch, I would almost go back to the fact that possibly it hasn't been designed in a co-design sort of manner, because that buy-in is generated through the process. So it is a little bit of a go slow to go fast. It really helps you at the end to kind of have much faster implementation or uptake. But, you know, for sure, it is a bit of a slower process when you're involving more people and doing more sort of testing and idea generation. So, but yeah, if you're ever sitting around wondering how to get buy-in, thinking about the process is a good place to start.
And we'll be back in a minute to hear more from Samantha Gadd about recruitment and the Employee Experience Design School.
Kia ora, I'm Jane, podcast manager here at The Spinoff. I'm just dropping in to recommend subscribing to The Spinoff Rec Room. It's our weekly newsletter delivered to inboxes every Wednesday, and it's packed full of all our best recommendations. There's new things to watch, listen to, read, play, eat, drink, or make your life that little bit better in some other way. Subscribe now at the newsletters section of thespinoff.co.nz, or head over to thespinoffrecroom.substack.com to have a sneak peek first.
Tell me about recruitment. So halfway through or thereabouts in your journey, you started another startup around recruitment. What problem did you see there?
A couple. So I really saw a need for better candidate experience. So I think most people have had a shocking candidate experience at some point during their career. And we believe that the employee experience begins when you're a candidate. So we wanted to help organisations to deliver a better candidate experience for their people coming into their organisation. And the other thing is, I really feel like the model of charging a large percentage of a person's salary to hire someone, you know, I think that is there's potentially a better way of doing things. So we launched Kin, myself and my business partner at the time, to meet those needs.
Yeah, tell me about how it normally operates. So from my time working in tech companies, it was kind of wild finding out how recruitment worked. It'd be like, oh, well, we don't really want to recruit this person because we'll have to pay 3 months of their salary as a win fee. And you're like, the what? It seems like an enormous amount of money. And then you've got these incentives for recruiters to be, they'll have a 30, 40K kind of payday up ahead. So they've got these wild incentives just to hound everyone.
Yeah, and to put a bum on a seat, right? It's broken on so many levels. And I think that, you know, for every time you think about some of the negative behaviours that are linked to the recruitment industry, it does go back to the way that they're incentivised, I think. And so we created a model which was hourly rate recruitment. So pay as you go, fixed hourly rate, which is, you know, on the Kin website so everyone can see. It's very transparent. And, it creates a whole lot of trust with organisations. And also we're generally saving people often up to half of a normal recruitment fee. So it's hugely cost effective, plus really focusing on that really deliberate candidate journey.
Yeah, and you'd think that the kind of things that would have a person, especially a person with high demand skills in the workforce, the things that would drive them to come and work at your company would be things like the culture there and the kind of the place it would be to work, not how persistent a recruiter had been in getting in front of them, or
Exactly.
like that idea of actually like paying to just get in contact with people rather than as if they are the secret sauce seems to make quite a bit of sense.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, how's that gone?
So Kin's going extremely well. So I actually exited that business in January of last year, but that team is just growing and doing very well. Humankind uses Kin for all of our recruitment. A lot of our clients use Kin, and the service is excellent. The candidate experience, we get so much feedback, even from candidates that haven't been successful, about how good it feels to go through a process with Kin. It is really a phenomenal business.
Yeah, and in terms of other changes, after kind of 10 years in the CEO role at Humankind, you recently decided this year to step out of that role. Tell me about that process. And, it's always interesting when a founder who's been the CEO decides to make that change, as so often you become quite intertwined with that person, that kind of part of your personality and that being part of your identity. How did you face that challenge?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think for quite some time at Humankind, we've really focused on playing to our strengths, and it's fair to say that operationally running an organisation is actually not a strength of mine, and so I've always really hired people that are much better than myself at doing some of those things, and I have a phenomenal COO in our team who's stepping into that CEO role, and to be honest, she's been running the company for about a year now anyway. So I think it's important for founders to recognise what you're good at. I'm really good at getting things off the ground and, galvanising people around an idea. But when it comes to sort of keeping that thing going and the stay up or growth stage, it's probably not where I play best. And it's not where I have the most fun. So when I was recognising that I was starting to, not enjoy myself as much at work, it was that time where we sort of had a really good, robust conversation at the leadership team about where we each need to play for our strengths. And it's been really transformational at Humankind, each of us kind of going into the right role.
It can be hard, can't it, as a leader, when something's not necessarily something you enjoy, to remember that there are other people out there who are likely to love it.
I know. Isn't that funny? So true.
And what's it been like for you? So you've moved out of the role in order to then double down your focus on employee experience with this new venture, the Employee Experience Design School. But so there's that. But also, how has it been to actually kind of step out of the CEO role? Was it a kind of difficult thing with so much of what becomes your identity kind of rolled up in that?
Yeah, it's a funny question. So I'm only just in the process of stepping out now. So it all officially happens next week. And it's a funny thing that, my head is in a bit of a funny space, actually, because it is a big part of my identity. I do have a really exciting new focus, though, which is keeping me really occupied. I don't think I could step out if I didn't have something else to go into. But no, I'm so excited about EX Design School that I think it's distracting me from the pain of letting go.
and tell me about the EX Design School. What was the insight there, and what are you setting up?
Yeah, so it was last year. We were sitting around our leadership table talking about how we have more impact. We are really purpose-driven. We do want to lead humanity at work. So how do we do that in a bigger way with more scale? And a really sort of natural progression was for us to actually start teaching other people the approach that we take, teaching people about employee experience and how to become employee experience designers by integrating design thinking with HR. And taking that approach has been so transformational in our own business. We're really confident that if others took this approach, they would also experience awesome results in their organisations and a real confidence boost themselves in their careers. So, enter EX Design School. It's an online program that is essentially teaching people to do what we do.
Who's involved with it, and what kind of a school is it? Is it a kind of turn up with your clipboard, or is it online, or do you go in and consult, or how does it operate?
Yeah, so it is completely online. So there's 15 online lessons with a whole bunch of downloadable resources. So you'll work your way through kind of learning the foundations and the methodology, and then how to apply that to all the different aspects of a traditional sort of people and culture team. And in terms of who's involved, we've got just over 40 people, or about 43 participants in the program so far, which I'm really proud of every single one of them, because, when you get something new off the ground, it's, you celebrate every single win. And we've got sole HR practitioners from awesome startups and growth companies right through to, sort of handfuls of people across some of our bigger organisations in New Zealand. So we've got some incredible brands on board, some really forward-thinking people and culture practitioners. And the feedback has just been very humbling around people being super excited about this content. So the next step is to get some scale, and that's what my focus will be over the next year or so.
Oh, where do you want to see it go?
I would love to have a huge impact globally on how people and culture and HR is delivered in organisations. If I go back to my original purpose that's driven me throughout my whole career, which is to help people to love what they do, I just fundamentally believe that individuals should be involved in the design of their own employee experience. So the more organisations that have employee experience designers in them, the more that will come to life. And I feel very excited about the potential for global impact in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge unlock for, the 95% of time that people are at work, that people aren't thinking about how do we make it better in a very active way. And for if you engage people in their own decision-making, they're much more likely to stick to, whether it's values in a company or any of these things. People are much more likely to then live by them and use them.
That's
fascinating. And it's really interesting talking to you and hearing about kind of both of these big kind of changes through the course of the business, the rebrand to Humankind, and now the kind of stepping sideways from the CEO role to then start this linked company using your experience. What advice would you have for people who, those must be hard decisions, right? Like, you've built a successful business, you've got a team of something like 30, don't you, at Humankind? You're like, really great big clients. And with the HR shop before that, you'd built it to be a fast 50, successful business. But then you made the choices to make some quite big changes to set the stage for another stage of growth. How do you go about kind of making that call and, knowing it's the right call and backing yourself?
Yeah, I think it's kind of never resting on your laurels. I think every organisation, every industry is changing so much, and we always want to be at the cutting edge. So constantly challenging ourselves to what that will be. And then in terms of just doing it, I don't know, I'm a classic founder, just kind of attracted to the new and shiny. So it doesn't take much to entice me into trying something new, hence kind of, launching Kin and now EX Design School. So I love the challenge of that creation, of creating something from nothing. And, if you love that naturally, then I suppose you can't help yourself.
And just as a final thought, what will success be for you personally and for EX Design School?
Yeah, so I've talked a little bit about where I want EX Design School to be, which is to have that global impact. And I think with CEOs, business leaders everywhere, employee experience has to be one of the number one business priorities. So I'm hoping that, getting that scale should be something that, that's quite achievable. I think on a personal front, I'm a very proud mum of 3 beautiful boys who are 12, 11 and 8. And so really critical ages, the next 5 years in our household are going to be very, very important in terms of, nurturing them into the young men that they hopefully will be able to become. So spending a bit more time with them, hopefully, or I will be, and getting a bit more balance will be really nice. So I'm excited about growing what looks like to be, a product business versus a services business is where I've always been. So, I'm feeling very energised.
Magic. Well, thank you so much for sharing the story today. That's Samantha Gadd, founder at Humankind and founder at EX Design School. Kia ora.
Thank you so much, Simon. It's been a real treat to be on this podcast after listening to many, many of them over the years. So thank you for having me.
That's so cool. Thank you so much to Te Aihe Butler for producing, and thank you very much for having us along and listening. Cheers.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. Brought to you by the Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.